The night the fire broke out, I thought it was the end of everything. It started as a faint smell of smoke, the kind that makes you think someone left toast in the oven too long. But within minutes, the air turned thick, the alarm shrieked, and the hallway outside my apartment glowed a violent, flickering orange. I remember standing frozen at my door, barefoot, clutching my phone, unable to decide whether to run or call for help. Heat pressed against the walls like a living thing, and the sound, the roar of burning wood and shattering glass, swallowed every thought in my head. I tried to make it to the stairs, but the smoke rolled in like a black tide. My lungs burned with every breath. Someone was shouting from the other end of the corridor, but I couldn't see who. My vision blurred. Spots danced before my eyes, and the floor beneath my feet felt hot, trembling. That's when I stumbled, choking, and fell to my knees. I remember thinking, so this is it. Then, out of the haze, a figure appeared. A heavy silhouette in gear, helmet glinting in the hellish light. His voice was firm but calm, cutting through the chaos. "Stay with me. Don't close your eyes." Strong arms lifted me before I could even respond. I remember the smell of soot, sweat, and something else, steel and safety. I felt my cheek press against the rough fabric of his uniform as he carried me down the stairs. Every step thundered through my fading senses, a rhythm I still hear in my dreams. When we finally reached the outside, cold air hit me like a slap. My body convulsed with coughs I couldn't control. I remember collapsing against the pavement, surrounded by flashing red and blue lights. Someone wrapped a blanket around me. Someone else asked questions I couldn't answer. Through the blur of paramedics and chaos, I saw him, my rescuer. The firefighter stood near the burning building, helmet under his arm, his face streaked with ash and sweat. His eyes, gray, steady, met mine for just a second. He gave a small nod as if to say, "You're safe now," and then he turned away, already moving toward another call for help. That image burned deeper than the fire itself. Days later, my apartment was gone. Charred ruins, blackened memories. Insurance, paperwork, endless questions. But none of that haunted me as much as him. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face through the smoke. Tired, resolute, utterly human. I couldn't explain it, but a strange weight pressed on me. Gratitude mixed with guilt. Why me? Why had he risked his life for a stranger? I began to dream about that night. The way his hand gripped my arm. The sound of his voice shouting over the flames. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, heart racing, half expecting to hear the crackle of fire again. Sometimes I'd catch myself rehearsing what I'd say if I met him. Just thank you. Simple words, but none of the versions in my head ever felt right. Weeks passed before I finally found out his name. It was printed in a local news article. Captain Ray Mercer, 46, a decorated firefighter who had saved 3 people from the blaze. The same article said he'd been injured slightly, but returned to duty days later. I stared at his photo for a long time. He looked older in daylight, rugged lines framing his face, a kind of quiet fatigue in his expression. Still, something about him stirred a sense of familiarity, almost comfort. Maybe it was guilt that pushed me, or maybe it was the need for closure. But one morning I decided I had to meet him, to see him face to face and say the words that had been burning in my chest since that night. It wasn't about the fire anymore. It was about him, the man who had carried me out of the dark. So I found out where his fire station was, rehearsed my gratitude one last time, and made the trip across town. As I walked toward the red brick building with Station 19 painted across the front, my heart pounded harder than it had during the fire itself. My palms were slick with sweat, my throat dry. I kept imagining how he'd react. Maybe a polite smile, maybe a handshake. Maybe even a quiet conversation before he went back to work. But I had no idea that my gratitude visit would change the way I saw him forever. When I reached the station, the afternoon sun reflected off the red-painted trucks parked outside. The faint scent of smoke still lingered in the air, mixed with something metallic and clean. The smell of work, danger, and discipline. A few firefighters were standing near the garage, laughing and talking, their heavy boots echoing against the concrete. I hesitated at the entrance, clutching the paper bag that held a small box of chocolates and a handwritten note. It felt almost childish now, but it was all I could think of. A simple gesture of thanks. A young man at the front desk noticed me. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone brisk but friendly. "I'm here to see Captain Mercer," I said. Trying not to sound nervous, he nodded, picked up the phone, and after a brief exchange said, "He's in his office upstairs. You can go ahead." My steps felt heavier with each stair I climbed. The hallway was lined with framed photos, rescues, group shots, medals, newspaper clippings. Captain Ray Mercer appeared in almost every one, in uniform beside roaring flames, shaking hands with officials. A man who had saved countless lives, who lived surrounded by danger yet carried himself with calm certainty. When I reached the end of the corridor, his door stood slightly ajar. A brass nameplate read Captain R. Mercer. I knocked softly. "Come in," a voice called. He was seated behind his desk, pen in hand, half buried in paperwork. When he looked up, I almost froze again. The man before me was exactly how I remembered him. Tall, broad-shouldered, his hair touched with silver, a few days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. His eyes were the same gray I'd seen through the smoke. Calm, steady, but now tinged with something else. "Captain Mercer?" I managed to say. He nodded, setting the pen down. "Yes, how can I help you?" You saved me," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "From the apartment fire on West 5th Street. I just wanted to thank you." "In person." His expression shifted. Surprise first, then something gentler. He leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment. "That was you?" he said quietly. "I remember. You were unconscious when we carried you out. You're looking better now." I smiled nervously, holding out the small paper bag. I wanted to give you this. It's nothing big, just a small thank you." He accepted it with a slow nod, his fingers brushing mine as he took it. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "We don't get visitors like this often." "I wanted to," I said quickly. "You saved my life. I've been wanting to meet you since that night. I guess I just needed to say thank you properly." For a moment his expression softened, the edges of a smile tugging at his lips. But then something subtle shifted in the air. His gaze lingered a little too long. His tone grew quieter, lower, more deliberate. "People usually send a note or call," he said. "You came all this way just to see me?" I hesitated. Yes, I thought it would mean more. In person. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk. "That's thoughtful," he said, his eyes tracing my face as if searching for something else. "Not many people go out of their way like that." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "It just felt right," I murmured. The silence that followed stretched too long. He looked at the paper bag again, then back at me, and I saw something flicker in his expression. A misunderstanding I hadn't expected. "You don't owe me anything," he said suddenly, his voice quiet but firm. "I know," I said, confused by the change in tone. "You don't need to repay me like that," he interrupted, his eyes holding mine with unsettling intensity. My throat went dry. "Repay you?" He stood up slowly, moving around the desk. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. "I understand gratitude, but sometimes they try to say thank you in other ways. You don't have to." For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. I realized what he thought, and then my stomach dropped. "No, that's not," I began, but my voice caught in my throat. He reached past me and softly clicked the office door shut. The sound of the latch sliding into place echoed too loud in the small room. "Please, you don't need to be nervous," he said, his tone softer now, almost reassuring. "It's just us here." I froze, my body stiff. "Captain Mercer, I think you've misunderstood." But he was already undoing the top buttons of his shirt, his movements slow, deliberate, his eyes still on me. "It's all right," he said. "You don't need to say it, I get it. You wanted to thank me personally." Panic bloomed in my chest. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Words tangled in my mouth. I couldn't find any that made sense. "That's not why I came," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I just wanted to say thank you, that's all." He paused, hands frozen mid-motion, confusion flickering across his face. "Wait, what?" I took a step back, trying to breathe, trying to steady my voice. "I meant thank you, not anything else." His face changed then, the confidence draining away, replaced by something raw and embarrassed. He turned slightly, exhaling hard, rubbing his hand over his face. The room felt heavy, silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I didn't know whether to run, to speak, or to stay. My hands were shaking, my heart still pounding painfully against my ribs. He looked up finally, his voice quieter, almost hoarse. "I'm sorry," I thought, but I couldn't even hear the rest. All I could think about was how quickly gratitude had turned into something else. Something awkward, uncomfortable, and frightening. In that small office, surrounded by the smell of smoke and paper, I realized that the man who had once been my savior was now just a stranger with his own misunderstandings. And I stood there, frozen between fear and pity, not sure which one I felt more. For a long, unbearable moment, the silence in that small office felt louder than the fire alarms I'd heard on the night he saved me. My pulse was still thundering in my ears, my chest tight as if the smoke had returned, wrapping around my lungs. The air between us had turned thick and uncomfortable, charged with a misunderstanding neither of us knew how to untangle. I wanted to speak, but my voice wouldn't obey. I kept replaying the last few seconds, the door closing, his shirt half unbuttoned, the words he'd said. "You don't need to repay me like that." How had something so innocent gone so terribly wrong? My hands trembled at my sides and I could feel my breath coming too fast. My mind was a blur of confusion and disbelief. Part of me wanted to shout, to demand why he'd think something like that of me. But another part, quieter and sadder, just felt sorry. Sorry for him, sorry for myself, sorry for the terrible awkwardness that now hung like a wall between us. When I finally found my voice, it came out small and shaky. "Captain Mercer," I said, my throat dry. "I really did just come to thank you. That's all. Nothing else." He froze, still facing slightly away from me, shoulders tense. Slowly he turned back and I saw his expression crumble. His eyes, those same gray eyes that had looked so steady the night of the fire, were now filled with something else entirely. Realization, regret, and deep embarrassment. "God," he muttered under his breath, raking a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. I completely misunderstood." I said nothing. I couldn't yet. He took a deep breath and I could see his chest rise and fall slowly as if he were trying to calm the same panic I felt. "You don't know how many times people come here with expectations," he said, voice low, almost defeated. "Sometimes they flirt. Sometimes they think they owe something more. I thought—" He stopped himself, exhaling hard. "I thought that's why you came." The words should have made me angry. Maybe they did, a little. But underneath the frustration was a strange, heavy pity. The man who had once carried me from a burning building now looked like someone weighed down by his own life. Weary. Lonely? Confused? "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he went on, his gaze dropping to the floor. "It's been a long few years. I don't always read people right anymore." I could see how tightly his jaw was clenched, how he avoided looking at me. There was shame in his posture, in the way his fingers fidgeted at the edge of his desk. The strong, confident rescuer I'd built up in my mind seemed to dissolve before my eyes, replaced by someone painfully human. I took a small breath, willing my voice to steady. "I just wanted to thank you," I said again, quieter this time. "You saved my life, and I didn't want that to go unspoken." "That's it." He nodded, almost flinching at the gentleness in my tone. "I know," he said. "I believe you now. Damn, I really messed this up." The clock on the wall ticked softly between us. I shifted my weight, still uncertain whether to stay or to leave. But something about his face and the way his shoulders had slumped, the hollow look in his eyes, rooted me to the spot. He sighed, leaning against the edge of his desk. "You probably think I'm some creep," he said quietly, "and I wouldn't blame you. But that's not who I am. I'm just tired. People see the uniform and think I'm something else. Strong, sure, fearless. But the truth is," he trailed off, shaking his head, "sometimes I feel more lost than the people I save." That confession hit me harder than I expected. There was no arrogance in his words, only exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. For the first time since I'd walked into that office, I stopped feeling afraid. The panic ebbed away, replaced by a quiet ache I couldn't name. I could see now that his mistake hadn't come from arrogance or malice, but from a deep aching loneliness. He rubbed his eyes, his voice breaking slightly. "My wife left 3 years ago," he said, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "My son barely talks to me. I spend more time in this station than anywhere else. Sometimes it feels like I'm saving everyone except myself." I didn't know what to say. Words felt useless against that kind of truth. So I just stood there watching this man, this supposed hero, unravel piece by piece. He looked up finally, his eyes meeting mine again. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely this time. "You came here out of kindness and I made it something ugly. You didn't deserve that. I swallowed, my throat tight. It's okay, I said softly. Really, I just didn't expect today to go like this. He let out a faint, humorless laugh. Neither did I. For a few moments, we both just stood there in silence. The fire station noises outside, footsteps, distant voices, the rumble of a truck, felt far away, as if we were sealed off in a moment too fragile to break. I looked at him then. Really looked. The lines on his face weren't just from age, but from years of smoke, stress, and loss. His eyes, though heavy, carried a flicker of warmth beneath all that guilt. It struck me that the man who had once seemed larger than life was, in fact, smaller than I'd imagined, human, flawed, and hurting. And for the first time, I saw the man behind the uniform, broken, tired, and just human. Something softened inside me. The fear faded completely, replaced by something almost like understanding. He wasn't a villain in this story. He was just someone who had spent too long surrounded by flames until even his heart forgot how to cool down. He cleared his throat. If I could start this over, he said quietly, I'd shake your hand, take your thank you, and wish you a good day. That's all you deserved. I gave him a faint smile, still holding my breath in the aftermath of everything. Maybe, I said gently. You still can. He hesitated, then stepped forward slowly, careful this time, and extended his hand. I shook it, our palms warm, our eyes meeting without fear or confusion. In that single gesture, something settled between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. A quiet, unspoken acknowledgement that both of us had been caught in a moment neither meant to happen. When I finally left the office, I didn't feel angry anymore. Just thoughtful and strangely lighter. Behind me, I heard him let out a long sigh, the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for far too long. He gestured for me to sit, the embarrassment still lingering in his posture. For a moment, I hesitated near the door, torn between leaving and staying. But something in his voice, low and tired when he said, "Please sit for a minute," made me stop. I sat down across from him, still cautious but no longer afraid. The office felt smaller now, less like a place of authority and more like a quiet corner of someone's life. The blinds filtered in pale sunlight, falling across the piles of folders and photographs on his desk. There was one picture in a cracked frame, a smiling woman holding a boy in a firefighter's helmet far too big for his head. He followed my gaze and sighed softly. "That's my ex-wife Emily and my son Luke," he said. "The picture's old." His voice had lost all the firmness it carried when I first arrived. It was cracked at the edges like an old radio signal fading in and out. "I'm sorry," I said gently. He shook his head. "Don't be. It's life." He leaned back, arms crossed loosely, eyes far away. "We were married 15 years. She left 3 years ago. Said she couldn't do it anymore. Said she was tired of watching me run into burning buildings while ignoring the one I'd built at home." I didn't know what to say. His words carried the weight of someone who had replayed that moment 1,000 times, trying to find a version where it ended differently. "I thought I was doing something noble," he continued quietly. "Saving people, being a hero. But I missed birthdays, school plays, dinners. All the little fires that needed putting out at home. When she left, I didn't stop her. I just stood there frozen, same way you did earlier." There was no bitterness in his tone. Only the dull ache of someone who had already grieved and accepted the loss. I nodded slowly. "I get that," I said. "Not the marriage part, but the standing still part. After the fire, I couldn't move for days. I'd sit in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The smoke, the heat, your voice shouting through it. Every night I dreamed it was happening again." He looked up, surprised. "You still dream about it?" "Almost every night for the first few months," I admitted. Sometimes I'd wake up and smell smoke even though there was none. My friends said I should be grateful to be alive, but it's hard to feel grateful when you can't even sleep without seeing the flames. He nodded, the corners of his mouth tightening. "That's the part people don't talk about, the aftermath. I've seen it 100 times. Survivors think the hardest part is getting out. It's not. It's what comes after." I let out a slow breath. "Yeah, it's like I left part of myself in that building. Every time I try to move on, it's like something inside me pulls me back there." He studied me for a moment, then said softly, "You know, I think that's why I do what I do. Every person I pull out, maybe it's me I'm trying to save." His honesty caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw the same fear that had lived in me reflected in him. Different shapes, same fire. Neither of us spoke for a while. The hum of the station outside drifted faintly through the walls, the sound of Boots' voices, life continuing beyond that room. It felt strangely peaceful now, as if the tension from before had burned itself out. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he said. "Not just what happened earlier. In general. Sometimes people see the uniform and think I'm solid, dependable. But most days I feel like I'm just pretending to be someone strong." I smiled faintly. "You're not alone in that." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Yeah," I said. "After the fire, everyone kept calling me brave. But I wasn't. I was terrified. I didn't fight to live. You pulled me out. I just froze. The fear doesn't go away. It just hides better with time." He chuckled softly, a real sound this time. Rough but honest. "You know, this isn't how I expected today to go," he said. "Usually people thank me, shake my hand, and leave. No one ever sits down and actually talks." I shrugged. "Maybe that's what you needed." He smiled at that, a small, weary grin that softened the sharp lines of his face. "Maybe you're right." A quiet warmth began to fill the space between us. Not attraction, something deeper, quieter, born from shared pain and understanding. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was talking to a stranger who had once saved my life. I was talking to someone who had been fighting his own fires all along. He stood up after a while, rubbing the back of his neck. "I think we both need something warm," he said. "Tea?" "Tea sounds good," I said. He smiled, sheepish, almost shy now, and moved to the corner where an old kettle and two mismatched mugs sat. He filled them from a water jug, switched on the kettle, and turned back toward me. "So," he said with a half grin, "how's this for the worst first thank you ever?" I laughed, unexpectedly but genuinely. The sound startled even me. "Pretty bad," I said. "Though I guess it can only get better from here." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I'll take that." When the tea was ready, he handed me a cup and sat across again. The steam curled between us like a fragile bridge. The awkwardness had melted into something gentler, almost comforting. We talked for a long time after that. About small things, the taste of burnt toast, the annoying hum of the fire alarm that never quite leaves your ears, the strange way life resets after disaster. He told me about the night shifts, the exhaustion, how every call still made his heart race even after 20 years. And I told him about rebuilding in the new apartment, the quiet loneliness of waking up in an empty space that smelled like paint instead of smoke, about learning to sleep again and how even gratitude can feel heavy when you don't know where to put it. He listened, really listened, without trying to fix or explain. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. "Maybe gratitude isn't about repayment," he said. "Maybe it's about connection, the kind that reminds us we're not alone." I looked at him over the rim of my cup, the faintest smile forming. "You might be right." Outside, the sound of a truck engine rumbled, someone shouted a name, and life at the station went on as usual. But in that quiet office, two people sat surrounded by the remnants of their own wreckage, sharing tea in silence that felt like healing. When I left an hour later, the tension that had once filled the air was gone. He walked me to the door, his shirt buttoned neatly now, his eyes calm again. "Thank you," he said, voice steady. I smiled back. "For the tea?" He shook his head slowly. "For coming here today. I didn't realize how much I needed to talk until you did." I hesitated, then said softly, "Maybe we both did," as I stepped out into the sunlight. The air smelled faintly of smoke again, but this time it didn't scare me. It just reminded me that sometimes the ashes aren't the end. Sometimes they're where people finally start to rebuild. It had been nearly a week since that awkward, unforgettable encounter in his office. I'd replayed every second of it, the confusion, the silence, and the strange warmth that followed, until it began to feel less like a humiliation and more like a beginning. Somewhere between his trembling apology and that hesitant smile over a cup of tea, something inside me had settled. It wasn't attraction, not really. It was recognition. Two wounded souls who'd met through chaos had somehow found a sliver of peace in each other's company. So, when I found myself standing outside the fire station again that Friday morning, I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I told myself I was just passing by, maybe dropping in to return the mug he'd given me. But my heart was doing that thing again, that quick, fluttering beat that felt like both fear and anticipation. Inside, the fire station buzzed with quiet routine. The scent of smoke, metal, and soap still hung in the air, mixed with the faint echo of radio chatter. He was there, sitting at a desk near the back, flipping through a stack of reports. He looked up before I could speak. "You came back," he said softly, not surprised, just relieved. "Yeah," I replied, holding up the mug like a peace offering. "I figured this belongs here." He smiled, that same weary, lopsided smile that made him look younger than he was. "You could have just said hi. The mug wasn't going anywhere." I laughed under my breath, feeling the tension melt away. "I wasn't sure if you'd want me to. After last time?" He chuckled. "I think I owe you a few good conversations to make up for it." That was how it started again. No awkward silences this time. No locked doors or misread gestures. Just two people sitting across from each other, learning how to exist without the weight of what had almost gone wrong. He poured coffee for both of us, told me about the new recruit who'd nearly set off the fire alarm during training, and I found myself laughing genuinely easily, like it had been years since I'd remembered how, when the others left for a drill, I offered to help him clean the storage area. It was dusty, cluttered, and smelled faintly of burnt rubber. He showed me how to coil a hose properly, how to stack the helmets in order of rank. I made a joke about failing Firefighter 101, and he threw me a playful glare that didn't quite hide his amusement. "You'd make a terrible firefighter," he said. "I'd rather not test that," I replied, smiling. "But I'm a fast learner." We worked in silence for a while, a comfortable kind of quiet filled with the rhythmic sounds of sorting and sweeping. Occasionally our hands brushed or our eyes met for just a second longer than necessary. There was no spark of romance, no cinematic music swelling in the background. Just understanding. Mutual care. At one point he leaned against the wall and sighed. "You know, after that day, I thought I'd never see you again. I figured you'd want to forget everything." "I did," I admitted. "For a while I tried to. But forgetting doesn't work. You saved my life, and I think I was trying to find a way to save yours too, even if I didn't realize it." He looked at me for a long moment, eyes glimmering with something unspoken. "You already did," he said quietly. "That day you walked into my office, and even with everything that went wrong, you reminded me what it felt like to be seen again. Not as a firefighter, just as a man who's still here." Something inside me ached at that. Not a romantic ache, but the ache of empathy, of finally understanding what it meant to be human after being burned by life, in our own ways. We shared stories after that. He told me about his wife who'd passed years ago and how he still kept her wedding ring on a chain under his shirt. I told him about my anxiety, about how the sound of a siren still made my pulse spike, and how I'd been afraid to light candles ever since the fire. He didn't interrupt or offer hollow comfort. He just listened, really listened, like my words mattered. By sunset, I found myself sitting on the back steps of the station with him, watching the sky fade from orange to gold. The city hummed in the distance, but it felt far away, as if we were suspended in our own quiet corner of the world. He took a slow breath and said, "You know, you don't owe me anything. Not your time, not your visits. I don't want you to feel like you have to come back." I looked at him, smiling faintly. "What if I want to?" He turned toward me, surprise flickering in his eyes before softening into something like peace. "Then I'll be here." And I believed him. From that day on, I started visiting once a week. Sometimes we'd talk for hours over tea. Other times we'd just sit quietly, each lost in our own thoughts. The nightmares came less often. My hands didn't shake when I struck a match. And he began smiling more, a little freer, a little lighter, as if the ghosts in his heart had finally started to loosen their grip. People at the station started teasing him gently, calling me his lucky charm. He'd laugh it off, but every time he looked at me, I could see that something real had changed in him, in both of us. It wasn't love in the usual sense. It was something quieter, deeper, the kind of bond that forms when two people survive their own fires and decide, together, to stop running from the smoke, and maybe, in the end, that's all gratitude ever really is. Not a debt to repay, but a reason to keep showing up. A full year passed, and with it, the sharpness of that night's memory began to dull, not disappear but transform. The flames that once haunted my dreams no longer burned behind my eyelids. They'd become something else, something softer, like a reminder that survival isn't about what you escape, but what you learn to live with afterward. Life had changed quietly, piece by piece. I'd found a new rhythm, steadier than before. I went back to work, moved into a small apartment with sunlight that poured through the windows like forgiveness. I learned to breathe through panic instead of letting it swallow me whole. Sometimes I still woke up sweating from dreams of smoke and sirens, but instead of trembling, I'd just sit there, hand over my heart, whispering, "You're safe now." And in a strange, quiet way, I owed that peace to him. The firefighter, the man who had pulled me from the flames, misunderstood me once and then, somehow, taught me more about humanity than anyone else ever had. I still visited him, not out of habit but because it felt right. Our meetings had become a kind of ritual. Saturday mornings, just after his shift ended, I'd bring 2 cups of coffee from the cafe near the station, and he'd be waiting at the back steps wearing that same faded jacket with soot stains that refused to wash away. He'd grin as soon as he saw me, the deep lines at the corners of his eyes softening with warmth. "You're late," he'd say every time, even if I wasn't. "And you're still dramatic," I'd always answer, setting down the cups beside him. It became our language, this gentle teasing, this easy comfort built over months of shared silence and laughter. We didn't need to talk about that first day anymore. It hung between us like a scar that had healed but never forgotten how it hurt. He had changed too. His steps were lighter, his jokes sharper. He'd started volunteering again, teaching young recruits, mentoring kids at the community center. "Keeps me from turning into a ghost," he once told me with a half smile. But I knew better. He wasn't fading anymore. He was living. One afternoon, as we sat watching the city skyline fade into dusk, he said something that stuck with me. "You know, I used to think gratitude was about someone owing you something," he said, eyes tracing the horizon. "People come up, shake your hand, say thanks, and move on. I thought that's all it was. But with you, it felt different. It reminded me what being seen feels like. Not as a hero, just as a man who's still got something left to give." I smiled quietly, letting his words settle. "Maybe gratitude isn't just saying thank you," I said. "Maybe it's what happens when 2 people help each other heal without realizing it." He nodded slowly, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. The wind carried the scent of smoke from some distant chimney, and the world felt small enough to fit in that quiet space between us. By then, everyone at the firehouse knew me. I'd become part of the furniture, as one of them joked. I helped with fundraisers, joined in on fire safety workshops, even rode along on a couple of non-emergency calls. He'd grin every time he caught me awkwardly trying to fit the helmet over my hair. "Still not firefighter material," he'd tease, and I'd roll my eyes. But beneath the laughter there was something unspoken, a kind of bond that didn't need defining. He never crossed boundaries again, never let a moment of misunderstanding return. Instead, he made sure every look, every gesture carried only respect. And that respect grew into something sacred, something healing. One evening near winter, we sat by the heater in his office, the same room where everything had once gone so wrong. But now it felt different, warmer, safer. The walls weren't heavy with tension anymore. They held memories, laughter, trust. I looked at him and asked softly, "Do you ever think about that first day? About how strange it all was?" He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Every now and then. Mostly when I'm trying to remind myself how not to greet guests." We both laughed, the sound full and real. Then he looked at me, his expression turning thoughtful. "You know, I'm glad it happened the way it did," he admitted. "Not the misunderstanding part, but what came after. I didn't realize how lonely I'd been until you showed up. You made me remember that life doesn't end after loss, it just changes shape." His words hit me deeply. "You changed me too," I said. "I thought surviving the fire was enough. But you taught me surviving isn't the same as living." He smiled then, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes and stays there. Outside, the sirens began to wail somewhere distant, echoing through the night. For the first time in a long time, the sound didn't make me flinch. It made me feel alive. That was when I realized something simple yet profound. That day, that misunderstanding, that awkward, trembling moment of fear, it had all led us here. To this peace, to this fragile human connection born out of chaos. I didn't just thank him that day. I found a part of myself I thought the fire had taken. Now when people ask me about the man who saved my life, I always smile. Because the truth is, he didn't just save me once, he saved me twice, once from the fire and once from the ashes inside me.